Good afternoon and welcome to part 3 of Schoeneck King's webinar series on data privacy and cybersecurity for higher education institutions. This webinar series focuses on the intersection of higher education and data privacy and security. Today's discussion will focus on the importance of cybersecurity and data privacy policies and procedures for higher education institutions and how such policies can assist with risk mitigation. If you have a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to answer questions as time allows. Please remember to fill out the questionnaire following the presentation. Today, we are pleased to welcome Kate Hajar to our series. Kate, located in our New York City office, is senior counsel here at Bond and is a member of the firm's higher education practice group. Her practice focuses on advising colleges and universities, independent and charter schools, cultural organizations, social service agencies, and nonprofit entities. Kate has a wealth of experience that is particular to our topic today, as she previously served as Associate General Counsel at the Fashion Institute of Technology. Thank you for being here, Kate. I'm also pleased to welcome back to our series Shannon Knapp. Shannon is an associate located in Bond's Syracuse office. She practices in cybersecurity and data privacy and assists clients, including higher education clients, with data privacy compliance, cybersecurity incident response, and negotiation of tech vendor contracts. Shannon is a certified privacy professional from the International Association of Privacy Professionals with a particular focus on U.S. privacy law. Thank you both for being here today. Shannon, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction, Amber. We have a lot of information we'd like to try to cover today, so we should just hop right in. Amber gave our intros. I forgot to advance the slides, so we'll go to the next. So an overview of what we're hoping to cover today includes why data privacy and cybersecurity are important for higher education institutions, particularly why the implementation of policies and procedures is really important. Website policies and procedures, IT-specific policies, employee-facing policies and student policies and procedures, and then lastly, a quick overview of some practical tips and approaches to policy management, implementation, and things like that. So this might look familiar to some of you who have been on our series before. We had this slide in our introduction presentation, and this just covers some of the areas of risks for higher education institutions. As you can see, there is a wealth of risk that could be in higher education institutions, partly because there are so many different portions of higher education institutions that work together, but also separately. And so this is just kind of an overview, once again, of some of the areas of risk and why having policies and procedures that govern within these areas, but also broadly, is so important. So, Kate, you want to talk about this?
Yeah, just briefly speaking, we wanted to give everyone, a brief overview of, why data privacy and cybersecurity policies and procedures in particular are important to higher education institutions. And generally speaking, that is because of the massive amounts of personal and financial data that higher education institutions routinely process and house. And that data touches on a few different areas. It's student data, employee data, personal contact information, personal account information, social security numbers, tons of financial details, particularly in financial aid offices, and healthcare information to varying degrees, whether or not you're an academic medical center or a smaller liberal arts institution or community college, there is going to be some kind of health information that exists within your systems. The next slide, Shannon. Other reasons why policies and procedures are important. It's not surprising to this group that cyber attacks in higher education are a hot topic of concern, and that is because cyber criminals view higher education institutions as soft targets, as easy targets. There's a higher success rate, I should say, as compared to other industries that cyber criminals have with higher education institutions. 74% of those attacks on colleges and universities are successful. And that is compared to 68% business sector, 61% in healthcare, and 57% in the financial sector. Just by way of example, in June of 2020, the University of San Francisco was hit with a cyber attack and a demand for $3 million in order for the university to get access to the data that was compromised. Ultimately, the university ended up paying $1.1 million in order to get back access to its data. So, clearly from that one case example, we see that there's a huge financial risk to these attacks. It should be said that even those who do end up paying ransoms to regain access to their systems, very few, only 2% of those who end up paying it actually get full access, all of their data back, 2%. So it's an incredibly low percentage. And we may be asking ourselves, well, why are colleges and universities so vulnerable? Why are they viewed as the soft targets? There's a couple of reasons for that. One, the condition of higher ed institutions that's often cited is the fact that there is a culture at these institutions of openness, of sharing, particularly of academic ideas, research. Personnel, students are also transient at these institutions, so it can be hard to keep track of who is in and out of our systems on a daily basis. Next slide, Sharon.
Great. So the first area of policies and procedures we're going to talk about is website policies and compliance. So one of the big things that all higher education institutions do for many obvious reasons is have a website. And along with websites is certain compliance policies and procedures that should be in place on your website to govern student or visitors' use of the website, what kind of information you're collecting, cookies, and things like that. So the first one we're going to start with is the privacy policy. Most of you are probably aware of generally of what a privacy policy is. If you've ever been on a very large website, you probably have clicked I accept to this privacy policy and the terms of use, which we'll talk about in a second. Or you have looked at it for like Amazon or Facebook because you're curious what they're doing with your information. And so a privacy policy is basically a document that describes the general practices concerning personal information over the course of the operation. And it helps websites visitors understand basically what's happening with their personal information. Privacy policies in response to particularly GDPR, the EU GDPR that was passed in 2018, the Comprehensive Privacy Law, have kind of changed and now cover not only website use, but also your general information collection practices. So they're quite comprehensive documents. And these are really important for a number of reasons. Some of it is compliance, if you are subject to some of these particular consumer privacy laws like GDPR. But also the FTC has indicated that this is the best practice and that users now have an expectation of seeing things like privacy policies on websites because people are becoming more aware and more curious and also have more autonomy and care more about their individual rights and the data collection that's occurring with their information. And it's an important tool to build trust and transparency with users so that they understand what's happening. And this is beyond just students, but also donors and stakeholders, alumni, and all of those different areas that higher education interacts with. And this is a document that really needs to be customized to each individual institution. This is.
Can I ask a question before we move to the next slide, just very quickly? Why is it important that each policy per institution is customized?
That's a really good. Yeah, that's a really good question. A lot prior to, I would say, 2018 and GDPR, people would really just take form website privacy policies that they found on Google or things like that and just kind of thought that would cover their risk. But now, because there's so much that needs to be in privacy policies and has to be so individualized to your particular website, your individual collection practices at your institution, if you're subject to consumer privacy laws or not. And so it's not really a one-size-fit-all document anymore, and really needs to be, one, updated annually, and two, also customized to each individual institution. Terms of use, also sometimes referred to as a terms of service or terms and conditions document, is intended to be a legally binding contract between the website owner, so the higher education institution, and the website users. And this is an important document, not necessarily from a cybersecurity and data privacy standpoint, although it does help with some recourse if people misuse your website or hack into your systems or things like that. But it really is just an overall protection of the institution by laying out basically the rules of the website. And it protects by limiting, including like limitation of liability provisions, outlining what's considered misuse of the website, such as you can't hack into the website, you can't use the website to send spam, you can't upload inappropriate things onto public areas or any area of the website, just to name a couple examples. And so this is really a great document to have on websites to really protect the higher education institution broadly, but also in a privacy and cybersecurity space as well. And like the privacy policy, this also needs to be customized to each higher education institution, depending on how much interaction there is with the website. If there's a lot of public forums, chats, things like that, you're going to want to have much more specific protections in a terms of use than maybe if your website's more of just an informational page. Then a cookie policy, most people are aware of cookies. You probably get pop-ups constantly when you're visiting websites now. And so there's a cookie pop-up, which I'll talk about on the next slide, but there's also cookie policies. And so cookies are basically little things running in the background that help operate websites, and GDPR and other laws, and also just general best practices now encourage the use of cookie pop-ups and cookie policies so people understand what data is being collected that they can't see. So for example, if you have like a contact us page and you have a text box that individuals can fill in information, they kind of understand what information is going to be collected because they're submitting it. Whereas cookies are collecting so much in the background, it's important for individuals to have an understanding of that. And there's a lot of things that cookie policies should include, but some things is what types of cookies are running, where the information is being transferred, what's the purpose of the cookies, and how long the cookies will stay on their device, or how long that it will continue to track them. A cookie notice or a pop-up is what we're used to seeing, where you get something at the bottom of or top of a page saying, do you accept the use of these cookies or something like that? And this is required due to GDPR and some other international privacy laws, as well as some domestic laws. And also, as I said, some general best practices. And it must be written in clear, plain language, provide enough information so the user understands and can make an informed choice, and provides a clear way that they can make the action that they want, if they want to consent or if they don't want to consent. And as I kind of mentioned, cookie compliance is important because of the EU's GDPR, for example. And this is particularly applicable to higher education institutions. If you are having visitors from all over the world, which you very well could be on your website, especially from the EU, this is also going to become much more relevant for China's PIPL and some other privacy laws that are in the works. And it also might become more necessary as new technology is adopted in the future. And an example of this that we're seeing is session replay technology, which is a type of technology you could put on your website so that you can essentially watch back what visitors are doing on your website. And this could be done for a number of reasons, whether that's for marketing or customer support and things like that. And there's been a host of lawsuits as a result of this with privacy concerns. And so having a pop-up to not only ask for consent for cookies, but this particular type of cookie/technology is becoming more and more important. And so that's kind of our little overview of website compliance. Now we're going to move into more specific policies and procedures for the institutions internally. So we're going to start with a quick overview of some IT specific policies. So there's a number of IT specific policies. These are just calling out a couple of examples. And like anything else, these types of policies and procedures need to be customized to your particular institution. And whether you need all of these or not is going to be dependent on your institution as well. And you might have something similar to this, but not call it this name and things like that. And so we're going to call out a couple that we think are particularly important, but if you have any questions about any of these policies, please feel free to reach out to us. So the first that we're going to talk about is a business continuity and disaster recovery plan. So this is a set of strategies, policies, and procedures that help higher education institutions respond to and continue its operations during a data emergency and to basically recover after a data emergency. Business continuity and disaster recovery are also often talked about together, and often the plan is housed together, but they are two distinct concepts. Business continuity is more proactive and generally refers to the processes and procedures that might be in place to ensure that if something happens, critical function can continue to run. Whereas disaster recovery is more reactive and outlines the steps that are going to be required to resume operations. So it's kind of a proactive and reactive approach when you implement this type of plan. And this helps protect in the event of things like cyber attacks, power outages, natural disasters, infrastructure failure. So there's definitely a focus, which is on top of mind, of cyber attacks and data breaches, but there's other things that can affect your data and infrastructure as well beyond that world. And this helps protect in those situations as well. A very important document is an incident response plan, and we're just going to talk about it briefly because in the next part of our series of presentations, Jessica Copeland and Seth are going to be talking more in depth about data breach response and incident response. But an incident response plan is one document that every institution should definitely have in place. And it documents the how IT and cybersecurity professionals, as well as members of your incident response team, will respond to the serious security incident. So this is very particularized to just a cyber attack or a data breach or something along those lines. And there are a couple phases, that are important to an effective incident response plan: preparation, detection and analysis, containment, and post-incident activity. And often these response plans also outline your legal response as well that you will do in conjunction, whether it's with our team or your internal general counsel's team. And it also helps you respond more quickly to incidents and things like that. As you'll see, a theme throughout a lot of these policies and procedures is basically planning for the worst case scenario and preventing in the worst case scenario. And so you'll probably hear me keep saying that this will help you respond more quickly or outline your plan and your steps. And that's kind of the point of these policies and procedures, is so that if something does happen, you're prepared and you'll minimize the risk to the biggest extent possible.
And before we go to the next slide, let me just ask, higher ed institutions are notoriously slow in responding to attacks of this kind. How important is it to respond quickly?
It's really important to respond quickly, especially in the situations where you're having a serious cyber attack. The quicker you respond, the more likely you are to mitigate risk. And so that's why it's so important to run things like tabletop exercises or practice runs, which we'll talk about later, so that you are prepared in case these things happen and that you can see if your plan really works or if your policy really works. And so responding quickly really helps mitigate risk and also mitigate the harm that could happen to the individual's data who's may be affected.
And are there particular people that you recommend are involved in these initial responses?
That's a good question. It's very institution dependent from a hierarching, obviously your IT team, whether that's housed internally or externally, but then also having on a point person, it doesn't that really is coordinating and taking charge. And then also having your legal team involved, whether that's in or outside counsel, having some more management position people aware of what's happening, all are important people to have make up your incident response team.
And those people are identified in IRPs, correct?
Yes, they should be.
Yeah.
The next we're going to talk about going with the theme of risk management or risk response as a risk management policy. And this is a little bit more of a proactive policy, and it kind of sets out the procedures for your IT team to identify and respond to risks. And so this really talks about risk assessments, how you can mitigate risks such as doing penetration testing, software patches, update to security and software, things like that. And so it really identifies the particular risks that your institution might have in your infrastructure and how you can manage that risk in a proactive way. And one of the things I called out that's particularly important is a risk assessment. And this allows higher education institutions to identify reasonably foreseeable internal and external risks and assess the sufficiency of the safeguards that you have in place. They should be performed periodically, and you want to look for potential threats and vulnerabilities, whether that's a technical vulnerability, a physical vulnerability, or administrative vulnerability, because you realize, oh, we don't have a policy or procedure in place for this particular risk, such as student misuse of the network or something along those lines. So that way you can identify the risk and address it before a negative event occurs. So now we're going to hop over to employee-facing policies and procedures. Oh, sorry, I lost my mouse for a sec. And so, like the other slide we had, employee-facing policies and student policies, this is just some examples. There's a whole host of policies and procedures that can govern employees and students, volunteers, and things like that. And it really depends on your institution and your infrastructure, your size, the type of data that you're collecting, and a whole host of other factors. But we're going to call out some particular ones that most, if not all, institutions should really have in place.
Shannon, this is a huge list. Are all of these policies required?
That's a good question. I would say, kind of like I mentioned before, a lot of institutions might have something similar to this in place, but it might not be called the same thing. So you might be covered in that respect. Or you might be able to combine some of these policies together so it doesn't seem so daunting. But overall, having a robust policies and procedure list or in place is important to mitigate risk, and also just for the internal workings of the institution and kind of keep things going smoothly. So I don't want to say yes, absolutely, but you definitely want to at least consider whether you have some of these from this list, and if you don't, how important they are to your institution and if you should implement them.
Okay. I know you're going to get into some of the specifics of a few of these policies in just a second, but when you're reviewing these policies for employees and students particularly, are there big red flags that you're looking for, or topic areas that need to be in these policies?
That's a good question. One of the first things we usually do when we work with institutions is kind of just get a lay of the land in terms of the amount of data at play, the infrastructure that's in place, what they currently have in place, and things like that. But one of the big things we look for, especially for these employee-facing and student policies, is if you have employees and students who are really interactive with your network, it is more important to have some of these policies in place because it increases your risk. And so if you have employees who have email on their phone, a bring your own device policy, which we'll talk about in a couple slides, is really important to implement. Acceptable use policy is really important to have for students for a similar reason, because they most likely are on your Wi-Fi network if they live on campus or working in the library, or are interacting with other parts of your network, and their proper use is really important as well. Electronic monitoring policy, we don't have a particular slide about that, but most higher education institutions, to an extent, are monitoring their employees. So having a policy in place is required under New York law for that. And so some of it has to do in terms of red flags or things we look for, the laws that govern your particular institution, but also a lot of other factors that I just kind of outlined as well.
Right. And there are posting and distribution requirements for some of these?
For some of them, yes. It'll depend kind of on, like I said, the laws that you're subject to. Also, your internal policy on that as well. If you have an employee handbook, putting some of these policies in there is going to be a really great practice, or on your intranet page or something like that, where some of these other ones, specifically the IT policies that we talked about a couple slides ago, are more just for the IT team and isn't going to be for the overarching institution as a whole. So the first one we're going to talk about is an information security policy. And so this kind of establishes the information security as a core value for higher education institutions. And it is kind of an overarching document that should apply to all workforce members, including all employees, faculty, contractors, student workers, and things like that, about the access and use of the institution's information assets. And it really outlines and helps all of these different groups of people understand the risks associated with the use of this infrastructure, provide a basis for ongoing training and awareness, outlines a plan for when something does happen, who can be contacted if something fishy is going on, or if they have a phishing email, what they should do. And so it's really a very overarching document that should be available to like all of these different groups of people. And you probably have heard of both information security policy and an information security plan, and they're pretty interrelated, but they are a somewhat different concept. A policy is accessible to the entire workforce, whereas the plan applies policies, adopts to the changing risks, and usually is owned or operated by specific groups and isn't for the entire workforce as a whole. And so usually it's housed with like the IT department or something like that. So they are related but slightly different, but this one's really a big informational document, and will also call out particular leadership that should be contacted and things like that. An acceptable use policy, I called out a couple slides ago, but is another important document. And it outlines the constraints and practices that particularly employees, faculty, and students must agree to in order for the institution to use the institution's networks, internet, and information assets. It helps manage these groups of people when they are using higher education institution devices, networks, if they're connecting to the Wi-Fi or the listserv. And it's recommended that these should be signed or agreed to during the onboarding or orientation process, and that this is specifically agreed to. An example clauses that you want to include in acceptable use policy is only using these assets in compliance with applicable law, that you're not going to hack into the network, that you don't send spam or mass emails, which I know could definitely be an issue on higher education campuses, and that you have to report any suspicious activity if you've lost your device or password or things like that. A bring your own device policy is also another important policy, particularly for faculty and staff. And it really lays out the expectations of using your own device if you have access to institution data on that device. And so it sets out data ownership expectations, that there's no expectation of privacy, particularly like if they have access to email, that there's no expectation of privacy within the email. Consequences for non-compliance if they're using their personal device for work-related reasons outside the scope of this policy. And if you provide cost and reimbursement services as a benefit to your employees or faculty, you can also outline those here. It also lays out security precautions. And for example, if you require that in order to use your own device, they have to have certain security software in place or security mechanisms. For example, having a 6-digit passcode instead of a 4-digit passcode, or using requiring that the institution install certain security software on it so that the device can be remotely wiped in the event that it is stolen or lost. And it also lays out appropriate use of the device, like I said, that is kind of tied to the acceptable use policy as well, such as not using the device for harassment or discrimination. And if you have non-exempt employees, also lays out the work hour requirements that might be associated with that, and also what happens at the end of employment and the return of such data.
Shannon, is a bring your own device policy required in all circumstances?
That's a good question. It will likely depend on really if the employee, staff, whoever they maybe has access to particular information. So for example, the easiest one to think of is if you allow individuals to have access to their email on their personal devices, then we highly suggest having a bring your own device policy. If they can remote into like a VPN network from their personal laptop, that's another, or like work remotely. Those are other examples of for sure when such policy is important. And these ones can, acceptable use and bring your own device policies can be a little bit, I don't want to say controversial, but I can't think of a better word right now to implement, because they do really affect the use in everyday life of your faculty and staff. And that's something that you, particularly with your general counsel experience and us with things we do every day, can help work through as well if that's a concern.
I don't think that the average faculty member or student understands, I think, the scope of risk associated with using their own device. So I can imagine a policy on this subject or the implications of using their own device for work-related things. Most people are not aware of the full scope of risk associated with that. Perhaps a policy is a good way of communicating those risks to people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the biggest things I think with policies and procedures and just this area in general is some people are on the uptake with understanding how much risk there is associated with this, but there is still a number of individuals who don't realize that there is so much risk associated with just the everyday use of the network or your computer or your email and just doing your job. And that's why having these policies in place, or also having training and things in place, is so important, so that you make sure that people aren't clicking on the phishing email, or and if they do, have a policy in place to understand what happens, not only in terms of the response from a technology perspective, but a response from a human resources perspective as well, in terms of if there has to be employee discipline or additional training and things like that. And so the more that you have outlined, the better, so that it's very, very clear for any of the people who have to implement these policies, what will happen when any of these things happen, because human error is still one of the biggest risk, if not the biggest risk, of having a catastrophic security incident occur. And so the more you're prepared, the more you have outlined, the more policies and procedures you have in place, the more likely it will not end up being as big of a deal as it could have been.
Do you see greater risk with allowing employees in particular to use their own devices versus devices supplied by the institution?
That's a very good question. I think it depends on basically the precautions that you put in place. If you require the employees to sign this type of policy and you put security requirements on their use of the device, then that definitely mitigates the risk, whereas you obviously have a lot more control over institution granted devices. And so there might be a little bit less risk, but bring your own device, especially in the wake of COVID and things like that, has become so much more normal that it's more about mitigating risk than completely avoiding it.
Right.
The next thing we're going to talk about is data retention and destruction policies. And this isn't necessarily a new concept by any means, particularly because there's FERPA requirements around data retention and destruction. But basically, a data retention and destruction policy is the protocol for maintaining and destroying the information that you have. And this can also help ensure compliance with the host of laws that higher education institutions can be subject to, particularly FERPA, like I said, but also GDPR, if you are a HIPAA covered entity, HIPAA, and among other laws that you might be subject to. And it's very important to lay out the data retention and destruction policy, because it's very easy to just hold on to data forever. And that is not the policy you want to have in place, because it obviously increases the risk that if something happens, more data could be compromised. And also just for the workings of your IT systems and for organization purposes and things like that, you want to make sure you're not just holding on to data in the cloud or wherever you might host it and not have any sort of eyes on it, essentially. And so it can really make things a lot cleaner and more accessible if you have these policies and procedures in place and clearly outline how long you're going to retain things, and then once the retention period is up, how it will be destroyed. And this really, we're talking mostly electronic files here, so how you can make sure it's permanently destroyed, but also this applies to your paper files as well, in terms of how that can be permanently destroyed as well. So vendor management is another important policy to have in place. And it identifies the vendors used by your institution, prioritizes them, and then identifies the risks associated with each vendor. And so for those of you who have been following along with our series so far, Amber Lawyer and Phil Zacchio did a presentation on vendor contract review, and that's associated very closely with the vendor management policy. The vendor management policy assigns the roles in the vendor management process and also defines the controls required to minimize risks associated with any vendors. Higher education institutions particularly use a lot of vendors in their everyday operations, and they can range from very large established vendors to very small vendors, and really having a process and policy in place to prioritize them and understand the risks associated with each of these vendors is critical for the protection of your information security assets. And some controls that might be put in place, like I mentioned, is required contractual provisions, which Amber and Phil covered very well in the last presentation. So you should definitely go and watch that if you haven't seen it already. But also looking to see if they have required certifications like ISO certifications, HECVATs, SOX, things like that. And it just overall outlines the required assessment and due diligence process that the institution should do before and during contracting with these vendors. So whether that is making sure they have these things in place, having a look into their systems, and if you have to, doing an actual assessment while you're in the contracting phase, while the contract is live, laying out all of those types of things. And vendor management is one of the biggest risks because of the number of vendors that higher education institutions use. And if a vendor has a data breach, that can obviously affect the institution. And we've seen that with some high profile cases that have occurred recently. And so mitigating the risks with your vendors is almost as important as mitigating the risks internally as well, especially if you're using vendors to host a lot of data, or if they have access to a lot of your information.
So Shannon, you've just identified vendors then as one of the highest risk areas, and acknowledge that there are tons of vendors that colleges engage with, routinely. So if compliance officials, in-house counsel, et cetera, wanted to, take a look at the vendors that they're working with, are there particular types of vendors that you think are most vulnerable? I mean, payroll vendors, for example, or student data management, enrollment vendors.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think the two you called out are particularly important because they're touching very sensitive information. So volume of information is important, and I think is often concentrated on, but also the type of information that vendors might be accessing or hosting or processing is important as well. Because even if it's not a large amount of data, it's only a small subset of your information, but it's particularly sensitive, such as social security numbers, financial information, health information, or things like that, that increases the risk of that vendor, even if it's only a small amount of data.
Yeah. what causes me concern is that there's always the newest vendor that's out there that promises more efficiency, greater ease of use for colleges and university personnel who are already overwhelmed with the tasks, in front of them. And, the attractiveness of that, of what they promise, has to be balanced against how they're using the data that we grant them access to within our systems. And so it sounds like what you're saying is that those, the vendors that have access to employee and student data are perhaps the ones that people should be looking at most often and most pressing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so the last kind of overarching group of policies that we're going to talk about, I wouldn't necessarily call it an individual policy, is compliance policies for applicable laws. We've kind of talked about that throughout, particularly in terms of like the document retention and data destruction policy, an incident response plan, and things like that, as they might be required under applicable law. But what we're talking about on this slide is particular policies that are very specific to certain laws that higher education institutions might be subject to. And so the example that we're giving for this slide is GDPR. We brought it up a number of times, and it's just because it's such an important law and many higher education institutions are subject to it. And some examples of GDPR specific policies that go beyond the policies and procedures we've talked about previously is a legal basis chart, which outlines the legal basis relied upon by institutions to process all of the data covered by GDPR. And as a reminder, under GDPR, in order to process information, you have to have one of the statutorily outlined legal basis to do that. For example, consent is a legal basis for processing. So having a chart that outlines that you got consent to process this admissions information is required under GDPR. A data subject access request or data subject request policy is also important because, as many of you know, data subjects in the European Union can make requests about their information, such as a request to know what information the institution has or a request to delete the information. So having a policy that outlines how the institution will respond to and fulfill these requests is also very important because there are prescribed timeframes that are required under the law. And then also data processing agreements. This is a document that goes along with the vendor contracts that require vendors to have certain things in place as outlined by GDPR and also other minimum data protection and cybersecurity requirements. And so we have about a minute left, and this is our basically last slide. So, Kate, you want to kind of wrap up with this?
Yeah, just very quickly, we recognize that, this is overwhelming from a policy management perspective. And, one of the first things we recommend doing in an attempt to get a handle on this is to figure out what is the scope of policies that exist within your institution that touch on this area and coordinate with the various offices that may own those documents. I recognize that in higher ed institutions, responsibilities for these things are often siloed, and part of the challenge is, understanding who's doing what policies exist. So that is the first big hurdle to tackle. Once you have a handle on that, and you've identified the team of people in your institution who are going to be responsible for this, we do recommend running exercises. They're often called tabletop exercises, running through hypothetical scenarios of breaches. To Shannon's very early point in this presentation, which is that it is important to be prepared and not be the institution where it took months for them to, fashion a response to a breach once it was identified. And we often work with clients to develop these types of hypothetical exercises. And then just finally, we wanted to say that these policies that Shannon mentioned and expertly ran through, thank you, Shannon, is the fact that they should be living documents, not documents that you review every 5 years, and they sit on the website or in some internal database and never get looked at. They should be living, constantly being looked at and engaged with. Particularly as there's a lot of turnover at institutions, as new people come in and assume these responsibilities, everybody needs to be on the same page and up to date. So Sharon, I don't know if you have anything to add on those points. But.
No, I think that's it. And we're about 1 minute over time. So I just want to highlight the next 3 parts in our upcoming series. That will go even more in depth, especially around the data breach part, but also talking about marketing and emissions and also the importance of cybersecurity insurance. So we encourage you to tune into the following presentations as well. And unfortunately, we didn't have time to get to some of the great questions that were in the Q&A. So if you have any particular questions or if we can help you at all, please reach out to us directly and we'd be happy to help. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.